Hello, huddlers. I'm really thrilled to have you all here today for what promises to be, I think, a fascinating conversation about the future, or certainly the potential future, of market research. Today, we're diving into the world of synthetic research, which some of you may know, some of you may not, but you're all going to be going, wow, mind blowing. And we're going to talk about it with Jon Lombardo, founder of Evidenza, or co-founder. Jon's company is making waves by delivering market research for major brands 10 times faster and half the cost of traditional methods while maintaining equal accuracy or efficacy. Yeah, as I said, it's kind of mind-blowing. So before founding Evidenza, Jon became known to many of you via the incredible work of LinkedIn's B2B Institute. So we know we need insights. We know that they can be the difference in the lifeblood of really effective B2B marketing. JD, we just talked about that and the need of an insight to create a great sales pitch. But traditional methods are often slow and expensive and cumbersome. So Jon is here to help us understand how synthetic research is changing that equation. So with that, Jon, welcome. How are you and where are you joining us from this fine day?
I'm doing well. I'm delighted to be here. I'm in Brooklyn.
So let's get to it. We're talking about B2B marketing, and I want to make sure that just in case our audience has to leave early or we want to convince others to say, what are sort of three misconceptions that marketers may have about synthetic research? And one of them may be they simply don't know it exists, but give us sort of three thoughts, one at a time, and then you and I can discuss those thoroughly.
Yeah, I guess the number one misconception would be that AI cannot reliably transmit to you what a human thinks or communicate to you what a human thinks, right? People have a hard time believing that AI can tell me what a wealth manager thinks or a product manager thinks. And in fact, there's increasing amounts of research showing that AI is very good at impersonating people and telling you exactly what they think. You know, we sometimes joke that we're working not with an N of a certain number, but infinity, because you're getting, you know, all of the product managers in a specific category to give you an opinion rather than just one of them. So this is probably the biggest misconception. It's probably the biggest skepticism we have to overcome every day. You know, there's just no way that AI can kind of reliably communicate to me what my customer thinks. It has to be done with humans. It can't be done with AI. So that's probably number one, I would say.
Okay,
But
we'll come back
obviously,
to that because I have some questions, but go ahead and go to number two.
yeah. I would say number two is that, you know, if AI can tell me something, it can just tell me the average insight. It can't tell me anything innovative, anything unique, anything insightful. And
Okay.
and I would say that's entirely false. I would say there's two different ways to think about that. One is just, I think, a misunderstanding of what actually innovation is. You know, innovation is generally just making kind of like incremental progress every day. You know, it is not some lightning bolt that comes out of the sky and strikes you and you have this kind of great idea. So just the idea that you can learn faster than other people using synthetic research, that is a huge advantage of AI. Speed alone allows you to learn more rapidly than other companies, other competitors. And if you just learn more rapidly than your competitors, then you will end up being more innovative than they are. So I would say that people think it's average, but actually the process alone is extremely innovative. That's kind of on the more, let's call it market research side of things.
Uh-huh.
But I would say even on the creative side of things, you know, there's an idea called temperature in AI, and you can turn the temperature way up or you can turn it way down. If you turn it way down, it means you get very little variability in your responses. You'll get a very consistent answer. If you turn the temperature way up, then actually you'll get a lot of variance in your answer. So in a creative campaign, or for a creative campaign or a creative idea, you probably turn the temperature way up and it'll give you some really wild ideas. You know, and you'll probably throw away most of them, but you'll probably get one really wild idea that's very interesting, very memorable, likely to cut through and be remembered. And so I would say on the insight side, you know, just the process of running faster, more iterative research is very innovative. But on the creative side, it can also come up with very creative ideas and increasingly is doing that kind of work.
Okay. And number three, because I have questions about that too, but let's get to the third.
And I think in all of this, you know, people think that synthetic research is risky. You know, I'm not talking to humans. It's going to be very risky for me. maybe it's a mistake. Maybe I'll lose my job if I try it. It's a novel idea. But I would say, again, if I just kind of doubled down on the core idea that I believe it's much less risky. If you do research today, I think you have two primary challenges when you do research today. One is what we call survey remorse. You write the survey the wrong way. You field the survey, you get the answers back. Only after that point do you realize, oh shit, I wrote it the wrong way. I wish I had that to do back. I just burned, a bunch of money getting something that is not useful to me. That's the survey remorse side of it. So the client writing the survey. And that's why people labor so much over the surveys. We can rerun surveys. So if you write it and you get the wrong answer back, we can run it for you again. So we remove survey remorse on, I would call it kind of the client side. And on the respondent side, there's a well-known idea called survey fatigue. And survey fatigue is why people only ask 15 questions, and it's often choose from these options, and they're very simple, like Likert scale type stuff, because you just have to get people through the survey fast. But in fact, robots are infinitely patient. And so they will answer question 30 with as much fidelity and as much integrity as they answered question 1. So it is not less risky to do this kind of research, in fact, because you can go back and rerun the survey, and then you get these kind of much better responses. So much so that people have said to us, like, these are actually too good, these responses, which is also something you've heard about synthetic diamonds recently, which is the complaint now is that synthetic diamonds are too big and too good.
Awesome. All right, let's go back. AI reliability. Lots of folks have been doing research for a long time. They've sort of created some understanding that there's a certain level of accuracy. What helps you? What kind of proof have you developed that is actually showing that this is, in fact, reliable? From a, this is really truly as good as what humans would have responded to.
Yeah, well, I would say first and foremost, the more actual market research I've seen, especially in B2B, the more riddled with errors I realize it is. So many people who we work with have a lot more confidence in our results than their own results, but their results are human results. So they've trusted them because that's the only option that they have. But I would say the more you see of what we do versus what you do with humans, the more you realize you get much better responses, much more insightful responses from AI than you do from humans. But we do a lot of comparisons between AI and humans. And we generally see correlations, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, which is extremely high. A lot of the kind of in the world of hard science, you have very high correlations. That's the whole thing, right? The things have to work. In the world of soft science, which is what we're all in, if you get a 0.7 or 0.8 correlation, that's effectively a gold standard. And we relatively routinely get that across a survey now in terms of just kind of replicating human response. Most research doesn't have that level of accuracy. So we do a lot of testing like that where people give us a survey. We don't get the answers. We just get the survey. We then run it. We recreate their sample. We recreate their survey. We run it. We then compare it afterwards, a kind of classic double-blind study. And then we look at the correlations. And as I say, we see very high correlations. And then when you have the ability to go back and ask additional questions as we offer, then you can even further refine the results. So it's not a one-off result. It's an iterative process, both in kind of gathering insights, but also improving the correlation. So we've just done a ton of that now. We've probably done more of those in B2B, frankly, than anybody at this point. Like, we could easily and have thought about and will at some point partner with an academic just to write up what we've learned, because I think it's such a fascinating area. And we arguably have more B2B data on both kind of like the human and the synthetic side in this way than anybody else right now.
I love it. Yeah. And that's certainly an easy way to sort of, we test, this is the results that came back with humans. This is the results that came back with us. What's it look like? So, and you've done that. That's a good answer. Now we got to the second point, big area, was average insights. And I think that a lot of us, when we started using, say, ChatGPT to write or ask questions and so forth, we sort of had AI standing for average intelligence. So now we can say, and you're saying it's not average insight. And you talked about, from a temperature standpoint, how you make sure that that's not. I want to dive in a little deeper and to make sure, and that maybe this is a moment where you can explain, what are we talking about here when we're talking about creating synthetic research?
Yeah, I mean, what we're really doing is we are creating digital twins of your customers. So you are defining your customer set for us. You're saying, I operate in I'm LinkedIn. I operate in the category of advertising solutions. My primary buyers come from technology. They come from financial services. They come from manufacturing. They come from healthcare. They come from education. They are primarily, in the marketing function, but there will be some financial decision makers involved. So we'll include the financial function. They have decision-making authority. They have some number of years of experience, and they're probably from, let's say 50 plus employees on. You would define your audience in the exact same way you would do it with traditional market research. We will then build digital twins. So I will build like a synthetic version of Drew or a synthetic version of Jon. And it will then go and build all those characteristics, and then essentially learn everything about that kind of person and the kinds of decisions that they make and the kind of authority that they have and what their industry is and who their customers are and how they think about ROI versus clicks. And it will just give all of that back to you, and it will rank order it for you. So in the same way you run a survey, you'll ask a number of questions. It can be either, here are the list of options, choose from it, or even here's open-ended, give me how you would think about this, or even more interesting stuff like, how would you explain this to your board or your CEO? So that's all that you're really doing with synthetic research, is you are creating the sample of people you care about, and then you are asking them the questions you want. And then you are essentially teasing, and better questions, by the way, get better answers, and more average questions get more average answers. So there's an art to it all, of course, but that's generally what the process is. And I would say, so let me just stop there, see if you have a question. Then I have another comment on average versus kind of excellent intelligence, let's call it.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions, but I think we're still in this world of in the realm of average insight versus
Exactly.
exceptional, and an insight
Correct.
that you can really use. So let's keep going with your other additional insight on average insight.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say as a start, I'm actually curious on this call, how many people have ever used the O1 Pro model from OpenAI? So I see at least one hand. If I keep on looking, so let's assume it ain't that many people, because I only see one hand. I see a couple thumbs up. The O1 Pro model is actually basically what it is doing is taking the core model that OpenAI built, and then it is trained basically using answers from PhDs. So you're not getting an average intelligence from that model. You're effectively getting a PhD in the hard sciences or the soft sciences to go and grade answers. And then those answers are used to train the model. So you're getting PhD level intelligence now at scale. So when you get a response about marketing, you can go ask it to give you a response about marketing from Byron Sharp or Philip Kotler, whoever you care about as your thinker, and you'll get that kind of response. So effectively, you have a PhD in your pocket. This has been going on for a long time, actually. In fact, they use a lot of very standardized tests to show the improvement that the models make. So for a long time now, the models have been able to ace the LSAT or the MCAT. And obviously, I think we all can agree that the LSAT and the MCAT are a lot more difficult than most of the marketing decisions that are being made. So I think if it can do those things well, it can do marketing quite well. In fact, really well.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of subtle in the sense that we're what we're counting on, and with this research is we've got a target audience and there's multiple people on the buying committee, and that you can create a synthetic twin of every single person on the buying committee with the wrinkles that go on with with each industry and the verticals and all of those things. And so that when, just as you would with research, where you say, these are the people that we want to talk to heads of security at these companies, for example, uh, we're relying on the fact that the synthetic twins are going to be, with all their sort of, will have the same foibles as humans and sort of answer hopefully with a degree of honesty and transparency. And
but they can do another thing, Drew. They can do another thing that they can, I mean, we talk a lot about, our people in B2B talk a lot about an ideal customer profile.
right.
But in fact, if you go listen, or if you go read the verbatims in lots of market research, it doesn't really sound like the ideal customer profile to me. It sounds very much like the average customer profile. And I'm not sure how much you can learn from I think in aggregate, you can learn a lot from the customer, you know, right? An average response means that lots of people believe that thing, which means there's lots of commercial opportunity. So people use average in a way that I wouldn't use average. Average in that sense across a big sample for certain questions means the biggest commercial opportunity. That is not average. That is important to understand. It's a stable insight you can build a business around, to channel Bezos language. But in terms of qualitative response, which we also pair with our so our quant is what we just talked about. The average is actually the big commercial opportunity. The qual we also give you is your actual ideal customer profile. You can effectively get the smartest customer on demand to answer your questions about your product or your pricing or your placement or your promotion, your 4Ps. So AI has a flexibility to kind of, in some sense, be as dumb or as smart as you want, to be as average or intelligent as you want. So it's knowing where to choose those kind of, the average or the kind of intelligence and apply it. That's where it matters. But people don't offer you the flexibility or, frankly, the intelligence. And I say that as a person, that we probably want as marketers.
So, okay. The last thing that we talked about is that this is actually a less risky form of research in the sense, and we've been there, and any number of us who've done research studies, and it's one of the reasons why you create a version of your research before, then you test it with a few people before you go out to thousands, if that's where you're going. But it does remove that risk because, as you said, you can rerun it. And it also, sort of, given the fact that it costs less, it takes some of the risk off the table as well, right?
Yeah, it does. I
All
mean,
right.
some people have said arguably we should charge more because it's less risky, which I think is a very fair point of view. We don't do that, but there's a view that, if it's so risky to do it one way and then we remove that risk, arguably it is more valuable for that reason.
Well, and you also have that sort of perfect, faster, better, cheaper uh, potential, which is sort of the golden triangle of promises out there. The
Right.
so I think it would really help people, particularly if you had an example, a specific example of some research that you have done that you can talk about for in general, or ideally a B2B customer.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that for you. So we do lots of research. Sometimes it is research around, we have 3 messaging pillars. We're trying to understand which one we use to put on our landing page or have our sales team talk about. I think the key idea there is what you find often with messaging is that it's just a reflection of the most senior person in the room. So like when we ran this for a big data management company, they were like, this is so interesting. You ran the 3 pillars. And one of the things that we do is we just identify what is the least understood messaging and who is it least understood by. And so everybody's talking about AI and AI agents. Nobody in a non-technical role has any idea what that stuff means. None. Even many of the people in technical roles don't have any understanding what that means. So if you take that data back to the organization, they get a better understanding of their customer. Hey, your customer doesn't understand what that is. The AI, it turns out, can also take things that are confusing to people and write a more clear version to the entire buying committee. So you can say, identify all the confusing language in these messaging pillars and write it in a way that is clear to everybody on the buying committee, technical and non-technical, right? So like one we had was bi-directional, communication with, I can't remember the platform. And the AI rewrote it as seamless integration with Microsoft 365 tools. So it turns out it's very good at jargon busting or removing confusion and then writing it in a way that's clear to everybody. That was not really possible before. You wouldn't have asked those kinds of questions or had that kind of data as quickly as they needed it to answer that, right? So that's kind of in the B2B world, we do that a lot. We test value propositions, message testing, we test creative, and it can either be concepts or it can be actual ads. And then another thing you can do is you can just ask questions. You can pivot your research almost in real time. So the thing we did in the B2C world, which I think has a lot of application also in the B2B world, is this was around like actual ready to drink products. So you go in and you buy kind of like a pre-mixed Jack and Coke, let's call it something like that. The company that you all would know, a very well-known CPG company, they realized that in the course of the research, they didn't actually really understand what they meant by convenience. Did convenience mean it was in the store next door? Did it mean a aluminum bottle versus a glass bottle? Did it mean a screw top versus kind of like a, bottle opener top? Did it mean a variety pack versus a single flavor? these are questions you wouldn't be able to. So they ran the research, realized that they didn't understand convenience. We're able to ask a whole set of questions or series of questions about convenience and give them a much deeper understanding of something that you would think they would understand, but they didn't, right? And of course, that's true in B2B too. Like, you may want to understand, what does integration really mean when I talk about integrating my product with other products? Or who is actually on the buying committee? Or how would you frame it to your CEO or your board? There's all these questions that are really wonderful to ask, but you probably haven't asked them. So you're unsure whether you should ask them. So we don't have the limitation of 15 questions and they all have to be on a Likert scale. We can actually ask questions that are more interesting for storytelling and for teasing out insights. And then it's easier for you to tease out the stories and tell the stories internally. So there are just ways that when you have an old, like when TV basically became a thing, they just took what worked in radio and they did it on TV, right? Everyone knows that story. When the new medium emerges, you just did the old thing. You don't do the new thing yet. The same thing is going on right now with synthetic research. People are still asking questions the old way. We don't have those constraints anymore. So we can ask much more interesting questions, many more questions. We can go back and interrogate the question even further. So we're reimagining right now what is possible. And I think that is just incredibly exciting and insightful.
It's funny because I, over the years, I've had so many conversations with CMOs where we talk about sometimes they just, can I be dumb for a moment and ask this question, like, what does this mean? And that was kind of the role of the CMO in many ways, is to help get this into language that people could actually understand, that wasn't just for a technical. And by the way, I see agentic everywhere. I still have no clue what that means. Just for uh, and it's used everywhere. And I think what happens in companies is that you just get used to, hey, we're all using it, so everybody understands it, right? And so that's a pretty profound thing. And I think sometimes, by the way, another thing that's interesting and it's always helpful with research is it's not the CMO or the marketing people saying, hey, nobody understands this. The research is telling us that this is a problem. Now, this gets back to, well, what research and why should I trust synthetic research? And I do think that you are coming from a place where proving effectiveness on a broad scale, not, I mean, look, there's lots of folks I know because you guys have been growing like crazy that have bought into it, but there's a leap of faith here. Oh, wait, this is suddenly different. Is it really going to be as accurate as if the old research was accurate, right? Which is a funny thing in itself. So it's interesting. I mean, this is really complicated for B2B CMOs, is that if they were to bring this in as a tool, they would really need to, I think, sort of do what you've done, which is run some research that they've done already and see what the results are with the synthetic.
Yeah, but I would just kind of push on a point I made earlier. I think people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what accuracy is, because the big question is, can it be accurate? The real question is, can you work with us? It may be accurate out of the gate. We have multiple customers where we have worked over subsequent iterations to improve the accuracy. And now you have a calibrated understanding of your customer that allows you to move faster than your competitors. So the idea that it is a one-shot effort is not right. It's a multi-shot effort. It's about collaborating, calibrating, and then you have an advantage. And that's what everybody should seek to do. So like there's an idea called evals in AI, which you see a lot of, actually. It's what I talked about earlier. I have AI take the LSAT or the MCAT and I say, wow, it's doing better than all doctors, all lawyers. Or I have it take a scientific exam and, oh my God, it's better than PhD candidates, right? And so what they're doing is they're basically showing that it's getting more and more accurate, better and better and better. Like we've started to do that now too. So you can basically bring us a survey now and we will run it against a bunch of different models at a bunch of different temperatures and say, we ran it 20 different ways. This is the best calibration for your audience. And now you can have confidence that we know it didn't work. We also know it did work. We're going to go with what did work and then make decisions on that going forward. So, but again, I feel this is going to be a continuous process that we'll be in, the customers will be in, but the idea it's to get to kind of accuracy through refinement. That's how I would encourage people to think about it.
Right. This isn't someone just saying to you, hey, give me research on this target, and you plug it into your little machine and you give them answers. There's some kind of, it sounds like it's a process that they go through when they work with you to sort of find the insights that they're looking for.
That's why I think we've been successful, because when we fail, we can still correct the failure. In the old model, you fail, it's over, it's done. In our model, if we fail, like we've had projects that don't go well the first time, we work with the client to make them better, to refine them, and then they end up in a great place. So we've had multiple customers who, you know, through refinement have basically like become completely convinced of what we do is better than the old way of doing it, and then become subscription customers. It seemed like it would have failed, and then they became a kind of a you know, an ongoing customer. So you know, this is just kind of the new way of doing things, isn't the old way of doing things.
Right. I think it would help for folks. Are there customers of yours that you can name that folks have heard of?
Yes, on our website you can see many of their logos, but we have worked with EY and Salesforce as two of our biggest customers, where we have done head-to-head tests, and that's where we have very high correlations. You can see that on our website. We also work with Mars, we work with Diageo in the more consumer world. They tend to be very interested in, yes, consumer research, but also what do veterinarians think? What do bartenders think? You know, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of ways that, or luxury buyers, there's lots of work we do that in B2C that is effectively what I would call kind of more B2B. Um, and, you know, we work with ServiceNow as an absolutely huge customer of ours. BlackRock is a big customer of ours. So, I mean, we primarily work with the biggest brands in the world, to be honest with you. I mean, we do work with small brands too. And AI is beautiful in that way. It's very flexible. Like the critique, to the degree there's a critique of Byron Sharp and how brands grow, it would be that it's how big brands grow. But AI is actually quite a democratizing technology and works just as well for small brands as it does for big brands. I mean, a lot of this research, frankly, you could never have done previously. But now a big company and a small company alike could do this kind of research.
So I think one of the questions that folks might have is there a version of this that people can do on their own to sort of start to get the comfort that they want? I mean, you know, everybody on this call certainly, and most people listening have access to certain tools. Is there sort of a baby step before calling you guys?
I mean, listen, you know, taking myself out of my commercial motivation for a second, everybody here should just be using AI to make all of their decisions. I mean, I use it for almost every decision that I make now, you know, whether it's in my professional life or my personal life. My daughter, you know, we were in the car driving and I was listening to a podcast, and she was watching TV on her little iPad there, and she never picks up her head from that, but she heard GPT being talked about on the podcast, and she perked up and said, "Oh, GPT," because she loves GPT because it tells her bedtime stories. You know, it personalizes those bedtime stories to her interest in, you know, all the stuff she's interested in, jewels and unicorns and the like. So I would just say start using it. I mean, using is believing. You'll understand it very quickly, but don't use, you know, use one of the smarter models, use an O1 model, something like that, that the 4.5 model. I mean, O1 Pro, if you want to pay the money for it, it's $200 a month, but I would say that's a useful investment, honestly. But just start using it and you'll see how much better it is than Google, how much more personalized it is than Google. And honestly, like another funny point is the early thing we used to hear a lot about is hallucination, you know, that it's going to give me incorrect information. But, you know, they just did a study that came out in the last week. Ethan Mollick is somebody to follow on either LinkedIn or Twitter if you don't already. You know, the accuracy rates around recollection for medical facts are basically there is no hallucination anymore. Doctors are much more likely to hallucinate than AI is. And that's just broadly true across the board. So I think you use it, you'll understand it. And then, you know, but using GPT isn't, you can't really do that in a reliable way when it comes to research. Like we run these evals across 20 models. We'll run the survey not one time, but 10 times to make sure it's reliable, that it replicates. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the industrial side to kind of give you or your company confidence to make the decisions. That's what we do. But, you know, from a personal perspective, you should just be using it.
Yeah, no, I think that, and I think most of the folks are with you there. You sort of helped get to some of the things that I wanted to hear, which is you're not relying on one model. You have built certain protocols that do this. You've sort of figured out a sort of way to do this that is proprietary, and perhaps have you even trademarked or patented or are applying for patents for some of this methodologies.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be doing evals like we do now. Like you have to basically be running all the different data you get and then the data you have from your clients. You need to be running it through, 20 models. Every time you run a study, it needs to be run. Like we don't run a study once, we'll run it 10 times. So you're getting the average across the 10, right? Which is quite important to getting more reliable, consistent results. These are just not things you can do as a single user through GPT, right? It's just not the way that it should work or will work. So, it's industrial grade, but again, I mean, that's kind of, also like, the thing I really love about the whole world is how fast it's moving. Like I feel that I still think there's value in talking to humans. Don't get me wrong. You should still do focus groups. You should still do some sort of research. The question is just, maybe you should pre-test it with us first before you go to market, so you actually understand how it works. Or often people get research, but it's not cut by different industries that they care about. You could bring us actual human data, and then we can actually reason off of that to do the data cuts by industry to tell you what is likely to be true in those industries. So I think there's lots of ways that humans and synthetic work together, whether it's the pre-testing or the post-reasoning, as I just described, but it doesn't always have to be a substitute. It can often be a complement as well. That's another really nice way to start. If you want to have confidence in it, we can reason off of your data. It doesn't need that much data to just bring you much deeper insights than you would get through traditional research.
Love it. Okay. So I think, again, sort of help folks really grasp this and understand it in a specific example of when your research generated some surprising as results for your clients. And we talked about the sort of the drinks and the word convenience, but I'm wondering if you could share another example that sort of surprised your maybe you guys and your client.
Yeah, I mean, I think a very interesting, memorable example, I'll give you the B2C example first because it's just easier to understand, is, you would think like non-alcoholic, low or no alcohol drinks are becoming much more popular, right?
Right.
People understand them. But you'd be surprised at the situational level that marketers don't really understand yet where there's uptake or not. So like a very simple but powerful insight around that is that, if you are going to drink a low or no alcohol beer, and this is some research we did in the UK, you are going to drink it when your friends come over in the afternoon on Saturday, where it's just a small, intimate gathering. You're not likely to do it in a pub with a lot of people. You're not likely to do it after rugby practice, right? So this is the kind of thing, again, where you wouldn't be able to ask these very detailed questions, but now you can do that. So I really liked that one because it gave them a very specific go-to-market or distribution strategy and how to think about that, right? I think that's a really quite good one. I think the
Yeah,
other
stop there for a second because I spent some time working with alcoholic brands, and it's so interesting. Brands that own an occasion that, where there's a moment in time where this alcohol is associated with this thing. I'm thinking of a rum brand that just owns sailing, the post sailing. We've just come back from sailing. We're sitting around and we're having that. And it's just a moment and they own it. And it's a brilliant thing. And so that it's fun that you guys sort of found that in a different way. Okay. So now you're going to go to a B example.
Yeah, the B2B example is that brand awareness is not a useful metric for big brands, right? It doesn't tell you anything. What it tells you is what you already know, that the bigger brands are more linked to the category. So big brands don't grow through more awareness because their awareness is effectively at the ceiling already. What they grow through is not brand awareness, but situational awareness. So category entry points. Category entry points are insanely valuable. And a number of our B2B brands have learned this because it solves a big problem B2B has, which is B2B marketers mostly work for sales. So if you're not doing something that works for sales, you're probably in trouble. And you're probably not going to have a job for as long as you want or as much security as you want. I saw that at LinkedIn. I dealt with that myself. So, but you really cannot do or have not been able to do CEP studies, which is just, again, the buying situations that matter to the customer. You have not been able to do those in the world of B2B because you can't get IT decision makers or business decision makers or accountants or CEOs, to take surveys. So we can actually put people through these surveys, identify the key reasons people buy the category, and then tell you that they buy it right when, for obvious reasons, like they buy tax loss harvesting solutions. They buy it at the end of the year when they're filing their taxes. They buy it during market volatility. That's an interesting one, right? Like people don't think about tax loss harvesting. They mostly think of it as at the end of the years when you do it, right? But actually, market volatility is a huge driver of when you do tax loss harvesting as well. So that's the kind of thing where you can identify those kinds of insights that are very valuable and then feed that to wealth managers or private bankers or sales teams who aren't thinking about it in that way, in a quantifiable way. And the thing I like about this move from brand awareness to situational awareness or category entry points is because the category entry points are identifying the situations in which people buy a product or service, like buying a new ERP or buying a new CRM or thinking about taxes. Because it's a buying situation, it's more highly correlated to actual market share gains than brand awareness is. Brand awareness has a surprisingly weak correlation to market share gains, whereas situational awareness category entry points have a stronger correlation because they are grounded in the buying situation. So that kind of work around why people buy the category, that is useful for product to develop better products that people want to buy. It's useful for pricing. Okay, in this situation, what do they prioritize? Is it collaboration? Is it scalability? Is it cost? Is it risk mitigation? So you can figure out how to emphasize the right points for willingness to pay around pricing. Where should you distribute it? Of course, that makes sense. Where should you place your sales teams or what should they say in those meetings? And then finally, of course, promotion, the obvious stuff we know, the advertising, the marketing, the comm stuff. But CEPs is a 4Ps type marketing that is deeply grounded in sales situations. So it's very much aligned with sales. And if sales likes it, that's obviously very powerful. But then you can also quantify it financially, which means finance is going to like it. So it's a methodology for doing something that is, I think, evidence-based that sales and finance will both support.
CEP for category entry points, I'm assuming.
Yes, exactly.
Just
Sorry about that. Yeah.
no worries. So really interesting. I think it's sort of a reflection of the fact that you work with a lot of big brands that do have high awareness. A number of the companies that are members of the CMO huddles community don't have that kind of awareness, and for them, awareness actually would matter because if I haven't heard of you, I'm very unlikely to buy you. Or the social proof required to make the sale is much harder. And again, for salespeople who work at companies that don't have awareness, they know that pain. You're calling from where? So, and I don't know. I mean, feel free to push back on that, but I feel like there's the world
No,
of haves and have
I agree
nots,
with it. I
right?
agree with it. But I feel that if you want to build awareness, so there's two types of awareness, I would call it. There's fame, which is you've heard of my brand. And
Right.
then there's situational awareness or category entry points, which is like when I need a new CRM, I think of you. When I need to reach out to my customers, I think of you. When I need to understand if I have any customers in San Francisco, I think of you. So it's more situation based. That's the category entry point approach. It's not just I know your name, I know the situations in which to think of you. Small brands that want to actually run awareness campaigns, I believe that if they adopt this category entry point approach, which is more about the situations that matter, I think
Right.
they're more likely to get those funded by sales and finance. And so if you actually want to build awareness, I think the only actual pragmatic way to do it is to do a CEP campaign where you can explain to sales and finance how it helps make the sales conversations go faster because you're talking about customer needs in those sales conversations. So I think you kind of should adopt that, especially if you're a small brand, because it's more likely to actually happen versus you go in and tell everybody I want to do a brand campaign. I don't think anybody's going to take you seriously or give you as much budget as you need. So it's not that I push back on the idea. I just think it's a more pragmatic way to build brand awareness is actually category entry points and situational awareness.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I'm still wrapping my head around in trying to think through from a category entry point. And for the folks that are in the audience today, if you are thinking about category entry points and have some for yours, feel free to share because I'm trying to think about that. And boy, it's variable. And so I'm assuming, just to tie this together, that one of the things that you guys this research is very helpful for is helping figure out some of these category entry points and figuring out which ones will resonate with whom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to give you a sense for, what I'm talking about when I say category entry points, because I
Please.
realize that it can be confusing. I'm actually saying, like, let's say it's LinkedIn. LinkedIn should be talking about, we can help you launch new product lines. We can help you expand into new markets. We can help you with a brand repositioning. We can help you with digital transformation. We can help you respond to competitive pressure. We can help you retain your customers. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. We can help you with event marketing. So you're talking about very specific needs that customers have. So your brand messaging could be, we're LinkedIn, think of us. We're LinkedIn, we're the biggest, professional platform in the world. That's the company talking about itself. LinkedIn saying we can help you with customer retention or help you with event marketing or help you with brand repositioning or help you with competitive pressure. It's the brand linking itself to the customer need. CEPs are the link between the brand offering and the customer need. That's the important thing. It gets you closer to the customer and the customer need, which is going to make the customer think of you more. It means when your sales team goes to talk to the customer is likely already going to heard that you have this solution in this space. So it just brings I would say that, again, the brand and the customer closer together, and that accelerates everything from marketing to sales to product to ultimately making money.
I'm wondering if so many deals today, or let's put it this way, opportunities, like something like the numbers like 60% don't end up in a sale for anybody. Like they just don't make a decision because they sort of realize that they can live without it. So I'm wondering if any of your research has been able to help someone in a company where, because clearly at that moment, well, Brent Adams would say the gain of change isn't worth the pain of change is probably one issue, or for whatever reason, they didn't think it was important enough or critical enough to, and this is, I think, increasingly important, right? Because this is right now, it's like speed to value and all these other factors are coming in and people are not buying. So it's one thing to say, hey, we have a better CRM. It's another thing for someone to say, yeah, I agree with you. I got to change it.
Well, I don't
So,
feel that I think the funny thing about Amazon is, why has Amazon been so successful? Like partly it's that Bezos is so brilliant, but like what is Bezos really so brilliant about? Understanding the customer, relentless focus on the customer. I leave an empty chair in every room to remind everybody at the table that the customer is the most important voice and the customer's not here, but we should try to think like the customer. What we do is we give you a deep understanding of the customer so that you understand them and they're more likely to choose you. So maybe 60% of, deals today are not closed. They don't buy from anybody. It's mostly because people obsess over the competition, they obsess over their product, they obsess over themselves, but they rarely obsess over the customer. The amount of times I get, what are my competitors doing? Who else is doing this well in the category? I get that 10 times more than I get, what are the key reasons my customer buys a CRM? What problems are they trying to solve? So I think we basically are putting people in the chair to help the marketer stay relentlessly customer focused, to be the voice of customer when talking to sales, when talking to finance, and that will make everything better. And it will mean that it's not 60% of those deals that don't get closed. It goes down to 55%. But hey, if you pick up that 5%, that's pretty big deal in most categories.
agree. I'm sort of thinking about where we started before we even started recording this call in April Dunford's. There's category benefits and then there's unique benefits that each brand can bring that ultimately sometimes requires an educational process to help the customer get there, right? Because they don't always see the whole picture, and so sometimes a good sales pitch is one that helps them see the problem in a different light and not necessarily the way they were looking at it. I'm not exactly sure where the question here is on this, but I feel like your research and April Dunford's thinking could come together and you could help marketers sort of find that, yes, this is your problem. I understand that that's what you're thinking about, and understanding if we could sort of get you to think about where you are and where you need to be and think about this problem slightly differently, in a way that will make sure that our company wins every single time. You've got some kind of genius messaging and research platform there. Just
I
a
mean, I
thought.
think in the end, like to put it in even prescriptive terms, like let's just say a company has 12 big decisions it needs to make in a year, right? Just going to make one big decision a month. How much research is used to inform those 12 big decisions in B2B? You mostly can't really talk to the customer at any meaningful scale. So likely, like maybe you do one big study a year. So maybe like 1 out of 12 decisions is actually informed by the customer needs and preferences and desires and fears and motivations. I think what we do allows you to actually put the customer at the heart of all 12 of those decisions. And you may decide you don't want to use what we have, but you ought to have it. You ought to simulate it and understand it. It will give you a deeper perspective, a deeper understanding. So I think market research used to be a big thing you did once a year. Now it could be something you do every week or every month. And that alone, just as a process, would deliver better outcomes. People are so focused on outcomes when it is the inputs that drive the outcomes, or it's the process that drives the outcomes. And just a more customer-focused process, which I kind of think is what April Dunford is saying, or what Ritson says about market orientation, or what Byron Sharp is, not Byron, Jeff Bezos is saying around like customer kind of focus, working backwards from the customer. If you just have that approach, since nobody else seems to want to do that or be able to do that, I think it just gives you an advantage.
I love it. All right. So as we get close to the end, I want to make sure that people understand. So what's a minimum viable research project look like with you if someone in our community wanted to engage with Evidenza? Uh, what what would it, what's the time frame? What's the challenge? What's the cost of just sort of getting started and getting in a place where this could be something that they do regularly?
Well, to be clear, we do lots of types of research. So I've talked primarily about fielding quantitative studies to understand something, but we do that kind of research. So you can, as I said earlier, you can do message testing, value prop testing, jargon busting. You can test creative messaging. You can do a segmentation. A segmentation is a form of market research. You can do a category entry point or jobs to be done or key drivers analysis. That's market research. We do all of those different things. So really it depends what you need to do. Most people don't do segmentation, for example, maybe once every 3-4 years because they're slow and they're expensive. We can do, maybe you used to be able to do a segmentation, once every 4 years. We can do 4 segmentation in an hour. We can show you what 6 segments looks like. We can show you what 12 segments looks like. We can show you what the needs-based version of it looks like. We can show you what the firmographic version looks like. So there's just lots of flexibility in how you can do these things now, but the speed is an enormous advantage. The flexibility is an enormous advantage. So all of these things that I mentioned, whether it be all the types of research or segmentation, targeting, positioning, classic strategy, creative testing, any of this can be done very quickly. So we can generally move as quickly as the customer needs to move. Sometimes people will come to us and say, I need this in the next week. I have a meeting with my CEO. You're the only people I've talked to that can do this. Nobody else can do this the traditional way. So I would think of us, if there's no other way to do it, we can do it. I would think of us in that way. And I would think of us in lots of different situations. The cost to do it varies depending on the complexity of the research. A segmentation in the real world will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the reality. A CEP study, I used to do these at LinkedIn. It took 3 months and cost at least 150 grand, so most of the research we're talking about is very expensive. It's, at least, $100,000 in 3 months to do. And, as you said earlier, and as I will repeat, we are generally, 10x faster and 2x cheaper. So you can do the math on time and cost.
Got it. So yeah, and that's really helpful. So if it was $100,000 research study, cut that in half and cut the time by a lot, and that's very appealing. All right, let's wrap up at this point with one thing you want our audience to remember about synthetic research.
I'll leave you just with a fun anecdote. People are worried about synthetic research and they worry, is it better than organic research? Let's call it. But the history of, I would say, kind of progress over the last 100 years is synthetic is better than organic. So synthetic vanilla is better than organic vanilla. Synthetic rubber is better than organic rubber. Synthetic oil that goes into your car is better than, organic oil. Synthetic diamonds are better than organic diamonds. As I said, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal on January 3rd saying the big complaint everybody has about synthetic diamonds is they're too big and they're too good and they're too cheap. So, synthetic is better than organic. I think people will figure that out over time. You can actually look at the insulin market as a very interesting market where it used to be human and then it was animal and now it's all synthetic. So I think this is clearly going to be the way forward. It's going to become something that gets adopted much more rapidly. I would just try to figure out, if you want to integrate it, you don't have to integrate synthetic into your most high risk project. Choose a low risk project, figure out how it works, figure out how to iterate on it, and then kind of move up the value chain or the risk chain. But the point ultimately I would make is you should get off zero, because if you don't, somebody else is going to.
I love it. All right. Well, Thank you, Jon, for sharing your expertise with us today and agreeing to join us at our 2025 CMO Super Huddle in Palo Alto this November. That's seemingly a long way off, and I just can't imagine how much your process and program will accelerate in the next 8 months. It'll be exciting to see that. And thank you for our flocking awesome CMO Huddles community for your ongoing curiosity. And we hope to see y'all in a huddle real soon.